Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and of course, our general joy of being alive. And we always make sure we talk about sustainable design as well. Today, I have our fourth episode with guests from Little Diversified Architects. 3 marvelous episodes, and we're about to have our 4th marvelous episode. I've got Philip Donovan with us today. No pressure, Philip, no pressure at all, given the fact that the other 3 episodes were amazing. Don't worry. This is going to be great too. Let's kick things off. First of all, I should say welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Joe. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today. Appreciate you having me.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Let's start by having our listeners learn a little bit more about you. Tell us why you became an architect. Walk us down the road that led you to Little Diversified and how you came to specialize in human well-being and ecosystem health.
Okay, great. Well, I became an architect on a fluke. I went to go register for college, and my mom came along with me. And at the time, it was 1999, and there was the big tech bubble. And so I was wandering aimlessly and decided I was going to go into computer sciences. So that orientation session, was in the afternoon. So my mother and I had time to kill. And she said, listen, your grandmother always wanted to be an architect. So I'm going to go sit in on the architecture orientation, see what that's all about. And so I didn't have anything else to do. And I sat on it with her. And the way that gentleman was speaking about architecture and the things they did and the means in which they did it captivated me. And I said, Mom, this is what I'm going to do. I was always somebody who liked to put things together, like to figure out how things go together and make things. And so I started on day one and never looked back. Part of that education was growing up in the wilds of Florida. Before the boomers, the large, massive boomers retired here, when Florida still had wild lands. And it was deep roots, the love of land. I'm a 6th-generation Floridian. My mother's family's been here since the mid-1800s, living on the land. And so it had a profound effect on me, the wilds, the inland wilds. Yes, we went to the beach, but we lived inland. And that shaped my view of nature, helped shape it in ways that helped make me a better and more compassionate, relatable architect to natural things, I think. My father was a pilot, so I used to slip the surly bonds of Earth with him up to 1,000 feet in an open cockpit airplane. And to see the world from 1,000 feet in the air is a whole nother level of experience. It's a whole nother appreciation for just how immense nature is, how immense the earth is, and that we're one small part of this interconnected. And so that started to shift me towards a more nature-focused view of the world, of architecture, of engineering. What led me to Little Diversified? Early in my career, I worked in Manhattan. I was doing planning projects. I worked on big corporate projects, and I had friends that were living in Virginia. I'd gone to school at UVA. So I wanted to get out of the race up there and went back to UVA and started working at a firm that was doing educational projects. And they really embraced this idea that every building could do better, and it just should do better, but it needs to be performance driven. We've got to prove it out. We have to model the anticipated outcomes and then follow up and see if the building's actually doing that. And we have to invite all of our collaborators to do that with us, the owners, the engineers, the end users. And so that instilled in me a passion for not creating an overlay on all of this, not saying I'm doing sustainable design. I'm just doing great design that's starting to uplift all systems of life. And when we talk about that, it brings to mind some other people that we've been working with recently and some articles I've been reading. And you have to excuse me and whoever wrote the article, but there was this beautiful article, and to summarize it, it really started to talk about how do we get people to love life again. And that's something Bill Reed talks about with Regenesis Group is we can fix all of this, right? We can start to make a better planet. We know that man-made climate change is creating conditions that are going to become untenable for us in the future. But if we start to love life again, it sounds kind of crazy, right? Of course we love life. We want to live. We want to be prosperous. We want to grow children and families. But to fall in love with life again, all life, that it's not here to serve our life, that it's here to coexist with us, really makes things better. And this article I was reading was talking about this notion that peril and possibility exist together. The idea that we can choose to continue a one-way street, a linear process of creating buildings, of living in those buildings, or we can start to look at the possibilities of living in harmony with nature, as we did before we became industrialized. So to me, focusing on not just human well-being, but nature well-being, when we focus on natural well-being, we do focus on human well-being. And then ecosystem health is just part of being a good architect every day, just striving to do a little bit better with the buildings we work on.
Do you want to bring lots of healthy, beautiful, natural light in your building and still meet energy codes? Try Solera from Advanced Glazings. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Right on. This is going to be fun. Okay, let's go straight to the Regen CoLab. Are you a founder of the Regen CoLab, Philip?
Not well. That's an interesting question. I guess I'm
Okay.
an original member of the
Original member.
Regen CoLab. Yeah.
So what is the CoLab? Why does it exist? What are you trying to achieve?
So several years ago, Little had put together a sustainability cohort and recognized Little was one of the first to embrace LEED, has been doing LEED. And I'm going to talk about the person that really moved that ahead in the firm a little later in one of your questions. But the CoLab, out of this group emerged people who were doing more. We're pushing the boundaries a little bit further. We're specializing in things that in processes and operations that were necessary to move the firm forward. Myself personally, I was doing high performance buildings. Before I came to Little, I had worked on two of the largest zero energy schools in the country. I had been doing this for about 12 years before I got to Little, and I got to Little, and one of the first projects we won was the first zero energy school in Florida. So I gravitated towards this group. And Little as a whole recognized that being sustainable was no longer enough. In the architecture industry, especially, buildings contribute 40% of the carbon emissions, the emissions that are impacting our earth. And Little recognized that we needed to go beyond sustainability in our buildings. And so this CoLab came about, and the creator of it was really somebody who, it was our chief innovation officer. And he said, look, I don't know that it's one person. I think, like Captain Planet, if anybody remembers that cartoon from childhood, your powers combined, all four of you, I think we can accelerate this. I think you spoke to somebody previously from our tech CoLab, right? Garrett, and he's part of a duo that's working on that. And together we're better. Our job, so there was four of us originally, and we were really focused on pillars. Things like somebody was focusing on the process with which we do our projects, and somebody was focusing on the administration of getting everybody moving in that direction. Somebody was working on the performance and the materiality, and together we were trying to turn the ship. And what we like to say is we were working ourselves out of a job. I mean, instead of saying we're going to do all of our sustainability projects over here in this group, we're going to get everybody in this 450 large firm in the US to move in that direction. So every project is addressing that. And if we can build the will and the capacity to do that, then our firm can double and triple and quadruple our efforts and our impact for our clients and the communities they exist within. And Little knew they needed a group of people that could think in that direction, that could work in that direction, that could look at for the interconnections of life beyond a building's edge or a site's edge or a mechanical systems extents, that they could see the interconnections. And it's those people that I share responsibilities on the CoLab with.
All right. Okay. Let's talk about the big mind shift you alluded to in your opening response about your history. And that's the mind shift that includes the environment, the ecosystems that our buildings exist within. I think we're about the 97th or 98th episode of this show. And people talk about humans, people talk about planet, right? But talking about the local environment, local ecosystems, this is new to us. So maybe the easiest way for me to start to understand this is through some examples. Can you give us a few practical examples of how Little and the Regen CoLab partners have created designs that have respect and consideration for local ecologies and local communities?
Yeah, I think to start that conversation, we need to look at how do we value and measure that impact, right? How do we show we're uplifting something beyond the project we're working for? Of course, we're being paid by a client to do a specific project. And at the same time, that project is interconnected to everything else. And I think what I find fascinating lately, and I've been focusing on this idea of indigenous intelligence. My focus recently has shifted towards building resilience, to understanding that the work I've been doing the last 20 years has created resilience in communities, but we're not talking about it. And no matter which way political spectrum swings, people swing on that spectrum, we need to build resiliency in our places and our people and our places and our buildings. I live in Central Florida. We get hit by 2 or 3 hurricanes now every year, right? Resiliency needs to happen. We can't overcome it technologically, but we can when we start to shift towards harmony. So when I say that, what we said is we have some big projects that we can talk about, some big impactful projects, do everything projects, but the real meat and potatoes happens when we get every project to take little steps. And it's not a pun, but we're taking little steps, right? We're doing one small thing on each project. And so the first one I want to mention is our own office in Charlotte. We moved several years ago to a high rise in Charlotte from more of a suburban office park. And as part of that, we started to explore how to uplift that design. It wasn't interior fit out. It wasn't a building that we built, designed, or helped build. It was our own office space, a tenant improvement. And what I didn't know until we started to explore these little topics was that we have these beautiful poplar logs that hang above many of our workspaces, our communal workspaces. And there's lighting fixtures above those, and light filters down, and it immediately draws your eyes to these logs. Well, these pieces of wood were cut from the greenway, or they were actually cut down to create a new road in Charlotte. And we were able to get a hold of these and put them in our office. Now, where it starts to build an impact is poplar is naturally fire resistant. So wood in our space had to have a Class A certification, fire certification, meaning it wouldn't burn and cause failure during a fire. And this type of wood does that naturally. So we reclaimed wood from a project where they were cutting down trees. We hung it in our office, and we didn't have to treat it with any chemicals to make it do its job and to keep us safe and healthy. So where we started to see a vision and started to connect dots through our interiors group up there. And people don't realize it. You walk in, you see, our natural biophilic response to wood. We evolved in nature over hundreds of thousands of years. So when we see it, when we're around it, we feel better. But it's also, we're using less chemicals. We're using less harmful chemicals. We're reclaiming wood that would have gone to a landfill or been burned up. So that was one small step. It was a very small piece of a large project, but it has an impact and that we can measure. The next couple I just mentioned, we worked on the Nature Conservancy's headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, are right in a very urban site, and it sits above a subway station. And some of the explorations that were done early on was, can we reclaim heat from the subway station? There's a lot of hot air shed in those systems down there. And can we just tap into it? We're sitting right above it. Hot air rises. Can we start to take advantage of that? So little shifts that aren't typical, because we've gotten really good in an industrial state at doing things easy. I hit the easy button and I'm connected to everything I need. But if we start to explore, do we need to add more tonnage on a mechanical system? Can we just start to use the heat down here? Now, the processes of our economies aren't set up for that. But when we start to have those conversations, we create an advocacy mindset to start to do it. And then Four Roots is an organization down here that focuses on food, our interconnection to food, and its connection to health and the environment and human existence. And we created recently and opened their education building. It follows a Living Building Challenge energy pedal. It's carbon neutral, reclaims water from rooftop and condensation. So it's the bells and whistles project I mentioned, but it took over an existing underutilized abandoned city site. The city leased it to the organization for $1 a year. So this is a swamp, good luck. And we're re-engaging with the land, where in an urban setting, we're starting to create a sense of renewal and redefining and reworking and reestablishing our relationship with that local ecology. So living in harmony with it and growing things that make sense in Florida, not in a hothouse where things can grow year round, but working seasonally and getting people out in an urban setting to reestablish their connection with the land. Some of this isn't, you don't need the biggest bells and whistles on a building. Some of it is just getting access and pointing people in the right direction to reestablish their own connections with nature.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I work in daylighting, the connections to the natural world are, my goodness, we just isolated ourselves from the natural world. We kept it outside, tried to put it in another place and leave us alone in our specially created little environments. And we're finding out that was a huge mistake. Let's talk about localized ecologies versus the planet, right? Like, do you ever run into scenarios where, the needs of the local ecology, the local community, the local environment run counter to sort of a larger, global sustainability health effort?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I mean, remember those bumper stickers? I mean, I think they're still out there. Think global, but act local, right? Go
Yeah.
to your local
Yeah.
farmer's market. And, a good cure for allergies is to get honey that has been created by bees within a mile of your home or something like that. I'm not sure the distance, because those bees have tapped into all of the pollen all around you. And as you start to absorb that honey, you can naturally overcome a lot of the allergies we have.
Oh.
But we ship honey in from across the country. John Rivers, the CEO of Four Roots, talks about, I think the average distance a head of lettuce travels is 1,700 miles to get to our table. When we grow it, we grow it right down the street, but it takes effort to go to those places instead of going to a grocery store and always have access to lettuce and strawberries all year round and tomatoes. But we used to live for hundreds of thousands of years. Human beings had to live with what they could get at that time of their lives and at the time that nature was producing it, and they lived in a harmony. So when we talk about that, local issues are global issues, right? Think global, but act local. Sometimes I flip that on its head because it really works both ways. But I want to ask you a question in order to answer this a little bit better.
Okay.
Is there a place, Joe, when you think about a place that you love, where is it? What is that place? Is it the beach? Is it the mountains? What place? Is it your backyard? What is a place that you really love?
It's my backyard. My wife and I recently bought a place in the country. We live on a river, in a river valley, about 3 kilometers or 2 miles from the ocean, where there's a beach. So I've got ocean, I've got mountain, I've got river, I've got forest. It's absolutely magnificent. And I've never in my entire life owned a home where I just feel joyful and relaxed the moment I come home.
That's amazing. I would love to visit someday. Maybe I'd love to have a beer with you there one day. But
Absolutely.
It sounds like you have found a place that nurtures your soul. And if I told you that they needed to build a new highway right through your yard, what would you do to protect that place?
Oh, whatever it took.
Whatever
It took.
right? I think
Yeah.
that when we can tap into that, so saving the earth is not something we can actually do. We talk about saving the earth. Think global, but act local. And quite frankly, the earth doesn't need saving from humans. The earth will, I think there's a lot of people out there that think if we perish, the earth perishes. The earth is no more. That's not the case. It may not exist in something that we would recognize, but it will go on. Nature will go on. We're only a small part of it. So the earth doesn't need saving. But what we can do is we can save the places that we love. And when we do that place by place, when we think local, then we start to save the earth. If Bill Reed really puts that into perspective in the talk he gives, and he lets me use some of his talking points and PowerPoints. And I actually do an introduction to new people. Everybody that starts at little goes to an introduction to regenerative outcomes. And we don't talk about curtain walls and solar panels and water cisterns and healthy materials. We talk about orienting ourselves to do better work towards coexistence with nature. And he uses these pictures. He shows pictures, and I don't know if any of you on listening in, or Joe, if you saw the pictures of Venice canals during the pandemic,
No.
If you can, they were bright blue. And if they were gorgeous, they were almost crystal clear. And if anybody's ever been to Venice, you know, they're very brown, they're churned up. And what happened? What does that mean? What happened during the pandemic? People stayed home. So nature naturally started to re-engage and clean itself up. So the canals became clear. They became clean again because humans weren't interacting with them in the way that was take a linear. I'm on the canals to serve a need that humans have, not to serve a greater life need. And so when we can do that, when we can protect your backyard from becoming a highway, we start to protect our existence and we start to save the earth. And that is a local issue. It's local to just your backyard. It's local to your community because you're protecting it for the person next to you and the person next to them. And that's where we start to create a global renewal and a global balance that we just have lost.
All right. I love that. I'm going to go maybe just a little deeper on a similar vein. And I'm going to steal a quote from the CoLab site, which is like a subsite of Little's. Here we go. Challenge yourself to understand the impacts your work has on places both upstream and downstream of your projects. Are you having a positive impact on the ecological and social communities out beyond the place you currently sit? And it's the line of out beyond the place you currently sit that really caught my eye. First, tell us what you mean by upstream and downstream of your projects.
Yeah, I love this. I've been fascinated with this idea since I heard it. And again, I was sitting at a desk. I was working on zero energy projects. Great. You know, I was reducing energy use, but that was still mechanics. That was still orienting buildings. But what we were doing was we created the school and it was connected to services and infrastructure. And I assumed the civil engineer was making that connection. And I assumed that the city was providing the capacity to make those connections because the school district was paying its taxes, or the people as part of that school district, the homeowners in that school district were paying their taxes and they were paying for those interconnections. And so when I stepped back and somebody said, think upstream and downstream, it became clear, no pun intended, that all of our places are interconnected. We're saving our places. When the canals in Venice became clear, so did the ocean around it. So did the rivers upstream and downstream from it because it was having a positive impact. So all places are connected to someplace else. All project materials. I'm an architect. You're in glazing, you're in glass. The raw materials for these buildings and these projects and those panes of glass come from someplace. The raw materials are extracted someplace where people live, near where people live. What's the impact of that extraction and that refinement on those communities? During the construction process, there's waste generated. That waste goes somewhere. It goes downstream of the project. Where is it going? What's happening to the people that are processing it? To the place, what's happening with the waste that can't be processed, the man-made waste that will never break down? Is it getting buried in a landfill? What's the condition of the places around that? So our responsible charge is to explore those and understand them. Just start to ask the question. I mean, we take for granted, I have a house site. I'm going to build a new house on it. I ask, well, where's my energy coming from? How far away is the plant? What does the plant use to fuel to make that energy? Where does my waste go and my water go when it leaves the bathrooms and the kitchen sink? I just take for granted that it's dealt with because I pay my taxes, right? But when we start to explore and even ask those questions, it creates a deeper understanding and the impact of those things can start to make a change. And I'm not saying, hey, let's go zero waste on this. It's just ask the question and say, well, can I reduce the waste a little bit? It's better for me. Is it better for somebody else? And we got to think about it long-term, operationally. My job as an architect, couple of years average on a project before I'm on to the next one, and I turned it over for 50 years or more to an owner. How have I instilled those same attributes built that will in the owner and the occupants? That's really looking upstream and downstream starts to take little steps to make that project have an impact on the larger systems of life it is interconnected to.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Right on, right on. Okay. We're going to switch gears just a little bit now,
Yeah.
Philip. We're going to go to one of my favorite places, which is when we have conflict or opposition or factors that work against each other. You
Mhm.
know, if you don't put windows from an engineering perspective, you don't want any windows in a building because you'll have better energy performance, but it'd be a crappy building that nobody wants to be in. Those kinds of trade-offs are constant in your world. So your team focuses on health, energy, water, and social equity, HEWS. You even use the acronym. So you focus on those things as key performance indicators. Beautiful. Give me some examples where any two of these four goals find themselves in opposition to each other. I gave the first one. Are there
Yeah.
Does it happen in others, or is it all about being smart and keeping all of them on the board in front of you such that they don't end up in opposition?
I think that's right. I think if you can, when you start to address one and you look beyond the edges of that one system, you see that it does start to uplift everything else. Putting windows in building and creating spaces that are almost all naturally daylit helps to address the health and well-being of the building occupants. It creates equity and we do it in schools and to people who may not always be in buildings that have a lot of that in their lives. It creates an equity because especially in schools, let's say, to keep that as an example, because we've got a mix of people, of occupants, of full-time and part-time. And so we aren't set up, and the way we measure things isn't set up to understand how it uplifts one thing and another. The water story is the energy story. Creating water for people to use, creating it and making it, sometimes creating it out of the ocean, but making it available to humans is immensely energy heavy. And same thing with energy. Energy is deeply tied to water, and the creation of energy is very heavy in water. So when we start to address the linear processes, things get better. Now, I'll go back to that question I answered before is when we don't address and we don't think upstream and downstream, that's when they oppose. When we have an energy plant that's its sole operation is to produce energy and it needs to have this much water, just give me the water. I need it in a certain way, and that's your job. That's not my job. But when I start to advocate a little bit more, when I become an advocate, was I want better water. I want the water to not have the creation or the transportation of water not have such an impact. That's when it gets to be aligned. But currently, most of our processes are very linear and they're very focused on that sole thing. So even just saying this, I mean, we're focused on health, energy, water, and social equity. There might be a better way of weaving a carpet, a phrase that addresses those all together, except that what the CoLab's trying not to do is get everybody to drink through a fire hose. We know that it's still baby steps, that we can design a better building, but if our owners can't operate it long term, they don't understand, they don't pass on the knowledge of how it's different, then it starts to regress to hitting the easy button. And everything around it isn't set up to do that. It's hard. One of the things that happened at Four Roots was it's a site that's been underused. It was an industrial site. It was part of the Dr. Phillips Orange packing district, lots of orange groves. It had city canals that ring it, and there's a wetland on the site. Well, the wetland died because these canals just redirected the water away from the site. So the first couple hurricanes, when we started working on the site, flooded it, and it became evident that the city really needed to address canals that were not maintained. So the city came out and addressed these canals. They dredged them, they cleaned them up. While we don't want water moving away from a wetland, we want wetland to do its job. We had to think outside of the extents of our site. And so that was something that we had this building and this site that was working great, but it wasn't serving the greater need of the community because, yeah, it wasn't flooding, but places around it were flooding. And it wasn't because of our building or the thing we built on the site or what the client was doing there. It was because it was shining a light on the inadequacies of the community drainage plan. And that meant that people living around the site were being impacted by it, by something that was out of our control, but that we had to start to advocate for.
Right, right. Okay. I got to rewind on something you said fairly early in that
Yeah.
conversation, just because it's so obvious yet so profound. And it's the siloing of the responsibilities that creates the conflict, isn't it? It's, if the engineers are off and I'm all about energy and the only thing that matters is energy, and then the architects are thinking about view and natural light, that sort of trade-off is certain to be built in. Whereas if everybody is responsible for everything, or at least see themselves as having some sort of level of accountability for all aspects of the design, the trade-offs go away. Is that a fair summation of what you just spoke to?
I think it is. And what I've learned, if I would rephrase that a little bit, Joe,
Yeah.
and you said it's not necessarily everybody's responsibility to take on the other person's role. I think in the military, right, the smaller units, you got to learn the next person's job. You got to know every person's job so that one goes down, you can fill in the hole and you understand what needs to happen and you can execute it. We don't need to do that, right? We're not in those types of conditions. But when we take that and we create a sense of advocacy. I'm an engineer. I don't do, I'm putting myself in an engineer's role. Well, let me stay in my role. I'm an architect. I'm not an engineer. But when I can advocate to an engineer, when I know a little bit more about what they do and say, hey, if I work really hard on tightening up a building envelope, meaning we're leaking less cold air or hot air, or we're letting less infiltration in, could we reduce the size of the mechanical system? Can we use less energy? Can you take a look at that with me? Could I get you to walk down this path with me a little bit and explore this? I think to that point is we can be advocates. We don't have to know exactly what needs to be done, but we can advocate. And when we're doing that, we're advocating for those avenues of social equity and social justice and energy independence and energy renewal and water and health, especially health, systems health. And I think the last thing I'll say to that is what became really clear to me early on when the client said, well, actually the first zero energy school I worked on, it was just a normal RFP. RFP came out, said, hey, we need a new elementary school. And we had just heard, a colleague and I at the firm I was working at had just heard these engineers speak. And they were talking about the interconnection of systems and how to get to true efficiency was to not silo things. For an architect not to say, here's the building design, give me a mechanical system that'll serve it. It was to say, what's your building design? Did you optimize the orientation? Did we really optimize windows for daylighting, but not heat gain? We used to have to do these things before we became technologically advanced. Jane Goodall said it best. We are the wise eight. We're the part of nature that could overcome the things that frustrated us or inconvenienced us. Refrigeration came along and boom, we were in business. We could keep all the hot air out. We could make things warm. We could make whatever building we wanted. And we tapped into an energy source that was cheap and easy to create. And we never worried about it. And lo and behold, in the span of the earth, we've created such immense problems for ourselves. But that advocacy, that performance. So this school came along, I digress, but the RFQ came along and my colleague said, let's try these engineers. Let's see what they can do on this building. And the engineers, we sat down with them and they said, look, this budget and this program, we think this school could go to zero energy. They had just completed the first zero energy school. So we went into interview and we said, we think you can do zero energy. And the client had the guts to say, prove it. And what that meant was we had to model the anticipated performance. And I, as an architect, could not say, okay, make it zero energy, Mr. Engineer and Mrs. Engineer. I had to say, teach me what you know. Tell me what you need from me as an architect to do better, to make a better building. And I had to listen. I had to put my ego aside and say, I like this design, but it doesn't serve the greater need of energy efficiency in this building. So let's make a better design out of it. Let's reframe the way we look at design. And that's really where that started to advocate. And that school system has now done 4 or 5 zero energy schools, just that the community has said, we want to pay for these. And they're paying themselves back when they do that. So
love it. Yeah, that was fantastic. And you'll probably see a couple of quotes from that being shared in social media in the coming weeks and months.
I hope so. It'd be great.
Yeah, it's spot on. Before we wrap up, and we're getting close, there's 2 things I want to cover. The first one is just the idea of different sort of, building sectors. Like, how do the principles change much between, say, a school and in a retail environment?
That's a great question. I thought about this for a little while, and I want to say that the infrastructure doesn't change. So great daylight in a school makes us feel better, makes
Yep.
us cognitively function better, makes us more astute and engaged. The same thing happens in a retail space, right? Great daylight in a retail space can do the same things. It's the engagement with humans that becomes different, valued differently. So a building is just there. It's there to serve a human, some human function. So it's the way we value that. When we tell people, look, and I love this because Little has all of these different sectors under its belt, right? We have retail and education and healthcare. And the way we create those buildings doesn't change that much. It's the way that it's used to forward the mission of the client and the engagement with its occupants. In healthcare, there was a while there that it was talking about patient health. You know, when we put bigger windows into patient rooms and they had better views to the outside, they got better quicker. They improved, health improved. Well, guess what? It also improved the work life of the people who were serving them and caring for them. The same thing goes for retail. When I can put things in a shop window and it's got better daylighting and it's got better visibility and views, it's going to draw somebody in. It's going to make people working there feel better, more engaged with the people that are coming in. So it's really, how can we start to fit these things, these attachments to nature? It's our biophilic attachment, right? And if you look at it, if you've ever looked at the seven factors of biophilia, it goes from very simple, just putting a plant in a building makes us feel better, a space, to awe and fear. You know, we used to create these cathedrals that were immense and they echoed walking through a canyon. When we walk through a canyon, it's awe-inspiring, right? We feel small and we feel our presence in that space. When we're next to the ocean, I saw a study that our internal well-being resets when we can see that horizon. So it's two very disparate things. And when we tap into those things, we create an effect on people who engage with them. So I think that what we have to do is start to unwork our way out of the technological realm that we've lived in. And I don't mean screens. Yes, we've got to get away from that. We created spaces, let's say in retail, that we felt showed off that good or service in a certain way for a brand or a way to deeply engage with that customer. And we kept overlaying layers of technology to do that. When we start to peel those back and get simple again and refine it back to natural engagement with light and air and material quality, then people respond better and really uplifts those brands.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, we're running a little long, but I want to do this anyway.
Okay.
I think we need to do a quick shout out to your teammates. Can you give us a quick list? And please don't go deep into the resumes or anything like that, Philip.
Yeah.
But I want to give a shout out to your teammates at the CoLab. Can you list them off and maybe give us a very brief explanation of what each one of them sort of focuses on?
Yeah, I would love to. This was probably my favorite question because I don't stand alone. I'm humbled and honored to work with these people every day. We all have something special, right? The person that put this plan together saw that, I think, and pulled this team together. I'll start with Vicky Breams. She heads our advanced building technologies group. So she's been creating our specifications for over 25 years here at Little, and she's a materials and specifications powerhouse. So for those people listening that aren't as familiar with the process, architects and engineers create documents that go along with specifications. We have drawings and specifications book, and that specifications book has all the ingredients for the things that we put in our drawings and the processes for which they're meant to go together and operate. She has done more to quietly improve the health and well-being of people on this planet through all of our projects in the 25 years than probably anybody I've ever met. She's an unsung hero. Her specifications are an unsung hero. I think if people understood and measured the impact of the way that she has quietly shifted our specifications to get rid of redless chemicals, to create better waste diversions and outcomes, even into operations, I think that impact would be immense and clients would understand how much they've been benefited. Jennifer Todd is an architect in the CoLab, and she is a passionate advocate for building performance. Jennifer helps us prove out the impact we're having through our built environment. And she does that early on by helping teams model the outcomes, and then helps operations align with those outcomes. Scott Rideau, he's one of the most compassionate and unflappable people I know. This is not an easy job. It's not easy in a CoLab. Sometimes we butt heads, and Scott is very even-keeled. He also has this immense capacity to see the big picture. And he's been one of the leading advocates for sustainability at Little over the last 30 years, really pushing it forward in a corporate environment where it hasn't always been easy to have those conversations, and to advocate for paying a bit of a premium for long-term outcomes, better outcomes. And we've recently added a fifth, Miles Grubbs. He's an engineer in our Durham office. He's swimming upstream. He's knowledgeable and witty and a very effective engineer in our teams. He again is another one that's sort of quietly changing the way that engineers are working and engaging with architects in our buildings. And he's helping to turn an industry, which is the engineering component of our buildings, toward better outcomes. And that's power to really make change. So again, I learn something every day that we work together, and love what these people bring to the table and to Little and to their clients. So.
Thank you for that, Philip. Let's go to my $1 million question. Every episode, I ask the same question of every guest, and I ask them to respond from whatever perspective they like. What makes a great building?
What makes a great building? I think if I took all of the things that we spoke about, and when I think back on indigenous peoples, people who couldn't overcome nature, the perils of nature, or the hazards of living in natural environments in Florida. I mean, right? I'm a 6th generation Floridian. People have somehow been hanging on to this bit of land for a long time. I think a building serves a greater purpose. It adds value to the systems of life it's interconnected to. A great building is one that cleans water for the building next to it. It cleans water for the stream that's a quarter mile away. It doesn't kill any birds while daylighting all the occupied spaces inside of a building. It's something that's not a linear lifespan. When that building is over, when it's torn down or reimagined, it has had a measurable impact on something other than just its building occupants, the site it exists on, or the mission it was there to serve. It doesn't turn its back on nature, it coexists. That's a great building.
Right on. Fantastic. All right, Philip, before we go, do you have any news, any announcements, anything exciting that you'd like to share?
I do. I have a big one. Little just received its JUST certification from the Living Futures Institute. And that's a big step for a large firm towards transparency and accountability in making improvements for our staff. I'm a partner, and it was really important to me. If anybody's not familiar, look it up, please. And you can look up our label. So everybody that becomes a JUST organization has an ingredients label, right? And it's a factor of things that we're all scored on. So it's diversity and inclusion, employee benefits, equity, stewardship, employee health, purchasing and supply chain. And it's a transparent look at where we are. It's not here's a big badge because you're the best at it. It's acknowledging where we are and that we're making improvements. And we have work to do. But Little, after over 60 years in business, has become a JUST organization and is created that ability to be transparent. And I think it's great. It's wonderful news and wonderful impact for our employees, but also for all the communities we serve. So I'm super excited about that. That one just rolled out last month, and it's our way of saying we're not just creating better things for our clients over here. We're trying to do better in our own work and operations and daily lives.
Congratulations. That's wonderful news. Philip, this did not disappoint. Once again, a little diversified guest that just put on an amazing show and created a fantastic episode. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Joe. I really appreciate it.
All right. You take care.
Thanks. You too.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.